Tonight we're focusing in on Zoom with Galaxy AI on the new Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. Ah, a baby tiger. Check out his claws as he prepares to pounce on that frog. Close one, but not as close as this Zoom. We can literally count the whiskers and... Oh look, Mum's here. Good thing I'm nowhere nearby. Go wild with Galaxy AI on the new S24 Ultra and zoom in on the epic day or night.
Get yours now at Samsung.com.
Conservative. Constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
And welcome, everybody, to another amazing day right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Of course, I'm your host, Andrew Cooperrider, and it's a big, important day. Obviously, session ended yesterday. Well, not session, but the veto period started. So anything that at all it was possible Beshear might veto will have been voted on yesterday. And then anything at all conservative, even if they do happen to vote on it, when they get back into session here in about 2 weeks, would be for show, because obviously Beshear could go ahead and veto those pieces of legislation. So anything I talk about, it's still not 100% guaranteed necessarily that it does become law, but there's a pretty good chance because obviously they passed it the first time now, and so it's going to come back around after the veto period's over, and Beshear has a chance to make his decision on it. As a reminder, Beshear has the options, because we're going to, like I said, talk about some bills and things. He has some different options here where he can either veto, and he has up to 10 days to do that. He can not veto or sign it, and he has 10 days excluding Sundays. And if after 10 days he hasn't signed it or vetoed it, it becomes law without his signature. Or he signs it, and it does become law. So he has some different choices. Now, when it comes to the budget, you can also do things like line item vetoes. Like say, I don't like spending money on that or this. That is a choice he has. So, but we're going to cover some important pieces of legislation that we know have passed and what the ramifications for it is. I do have good news. The gold and silver sales tax, I mentioned that in a few shows, exemption, looks like it did stay in to the revenue bill. And so assuming that passes, and it should, we will have now our gold and silver will become sales tax exempt here in Kentucky. I got to be honest with y'all. When people started a few years ago, first kind of talking about trying to get precious metals, gold and silver, those types of things, to be sales tax exempt, I thought it would never happen. I said, those greedy people up there, they'll never take their hands off those tax revenues. But when they started seeing that they really weren't making much off of it, because as I said priorly, people were just going out of state to purchase their gold or silver, well, they decided to go ahead and let this pass. So that did pass. Now, one thing, though, that didn't become sales tax exempt, because I guess it was just too much of a hit to the bottom line, was a diaper sales tax. So there's still a sales tax on diapers. That was in there originally, but it did not end up staying in there. We did have the budget bill drop as well, so we'll go over a few different things that we've seen so far in the budget bill. Obviously, it's kind of worked its way through. As of recording this, there's not a publicly available budget, so I'm going to go through a few things that are in it based upon what some of the reporters who's gotten their hands on it have posted, and kind of let you know what we're seeing as far as that goes. Now, big piece of legislation we've seen is House Bill 278. Big things happen there. So those of you who listen to the show for longer than a few days know that the issue of porn age verification has come up recently, because Josh Calloway made that impassionate floor speech trying to get something done, and much like last year, it looks like something will end up getting done. This similar thing happened last year, where Josh Calloway stands up and says that we need to get this passed, we need to get this done. And the House gavels him down, the leadership doesn't like him doing it, they react by shutting it down right away, and then they wait a few days, and they hear the public backlash around it, and so somebody ends up deciding to act. That's what we saw in House Bill 278. House Bill 278 was originally dealing with enhancing a variety of, sex crimes against children, so on and so forth. But on Wednesday, we saw Jay Williams, senator out of Northern Kentucky, put an amendment onto House Bill 278, which would require porn companies, pornography websites, to do age verification, and they're also not allowed to store that information or use it for anything other than age verification. And that received the amendments went through. They did a voice vote on it because it was considered. So when an amendment gets proposed, the bill's sponsor can decide whether or not it is hostile towards the bill or not hostile towards the bill. And so if the amendment kind of undoes what the bill's trying to do, the bill's sponsor may say, no, I think that's hostile to the bill. If the amendment is not, in the sponsor's opinion, taking away the intent or the purpose of the bill, they'll say that that is a friendly amendment. So this was ruled a friendly amendment. So there's a simple voice vote on it. We heard nays, but nobody explained their vote there. We did have Whitney Westerfield get up and speak against the amendments he gave out a variety of reasons. All of them suck and sound hollow coming from a person who literally lobbied Bevin to give a pardon to a convicted child predator. I'm not kidding. Whitney Westerfield to a convicted child predator. If you may remember, there's a pardon Bevin did, and he pardoned or commuted, I guess, or pardoned the sentence of a convicted child predator. And Whitney Westerfield actually come out and spoke against that pardon, but then open records request revealed it was Whitney Westerfield who asked for that pardon in the first place, Senator Whitney Westerfield. Now, he's not running again. So it's no surprise that if anybody was going to actually publicly speak negatively about this at all, it would be Whitney Westerfield. We see how he kind of feels about child predators. And so he got up there and he said that he believed that this was possibly an unconstitutional amendment. He said, sure, it's modeled off the same language that Texas has, and sure, a lower court has already upheld this language from Texas, but he believes in the end it will end up getting overturned, which is odd because when we had Senate Bill 150 happen, which was banning things like gender change surgeries on minors, chemical castration drugs on minors, when that bill passed in 2023, he didn't stand up there and say, I'm against it because I think it's unconstitutional, even though the legislation out of Tennessee was being challenged at that same time, and it mirrored very, very similar language. He didn't have an issue with it then, but he suddenly has an issue with it when it comes to this pornography thing. So Jay Williams doesn't, and the way this works, and for those of you who think that, well, it's only a parent's role to ensure that a child's not watching pornography, it's not the government's role, which is, once again, a stupid thing to say. I've never, either you think, I did a whole episode on this, so you'll have to go back and listen to that. You can head over to theandrewshow.com, check out old episodes. But I've never heard of another law that people think should be illegal. So if you ask people, hey, should an 11-year-old be allowed to, should somebody be allowed to show an 11-year-old pornography? The average person is going to say no. But for some reason, even though these people say they believe that it should be illegal for an 11-year-old to view pornography, for somebody to show it to them, they believe enforcing that law is somehow not the government's role. Now, last I checked, a government's role is to enforce laws. I've never heard of another law. A law like, hey, don't give tobacco to children, don't sell cigarettes to children, that then only falls to the parents to enforce that law. There's nothing else like that. But for some of these people, that's what they think of pornography. So what this bill does is it empowers the parents, because if a parent sees that their child was served up this pornography, they can now sue the provider for $10,000 per instance. So if they didn't provide proper verification. So for those of you who say, well, it's a parent's role, guess what this bill's doing? It's giving parents a tool to go after those companies for breaking the law in the first place. So for all of you who say, hey, this is big, government needs to stay out of this, it's still not government enforcing this. Government's passing a law, leaving it to the parents to enforce it in civil court. So there you go. Well, coming up after this, we'll be digging into a few other pieces of legislation that have passed. We'll have that after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. So going over veto periods coming up. So going over some of the legislation that passed yesterday. Now, one of the big things that passed yesterday was a kind of sweeping bill dealing with the Louisville elections. So according to this bill, assuming Beshear's probably going to veto this, and then it'll come back, and then I'm sure the legislature will overcome it. But it will turn the partisan mayoral and city council elections in Louisville to now nonpartisan elections. And this is interesting for a few reasons. One, it's kind of interesting because clearly, I mean, let's just be honest here. Politics drives everything. It's clear that the Republican legislature in Kentucky believes that if the mayoral and city council elections become nonpartisan in Louisville, more liberal or less liberal people win, more conservatives will win. And that's an interesting assertion when we take a look at, for an example, Lexington, because Lexington does have nonpartisan elections. And what do we see with the nonpartisan elections? Now, Lexington technically has somebody who's a registered Republican as a mayor, though a lot of Republicans, or at least she was at one point. However, a lot of Republicans in Lexington would tell you they were unaware she even was a registered Republican, or would tell you, yeah, we know, but she really isn't a part of us anymore. I've been obviously around Lexington politics for a while. I go to a lot of Republican events here in Lexington. I go to Lincoln Day dinners, the biggest event of the year. I've been to every Lincoln Day dinner for several years now. And they're the biggest political event of the year. And any Republican who's a Republican or even close to a Republican shows up at this event. And I've never once seen the mayor at this event. I've never once seen the mayor at the Lincoln Day dinner. And so I hazard a guess say she's not very conservative. She's not very Republican. But when you look at our city council, right now, I believe we only have one registered Republican on our city council in Lexington, and he's not that conservative either. When there was a breakout drag performance in the middle of city council one time in Lexington that was, oh, by the way, also against decorum, but they didn't bother trying to stop him. But when there's a breakout drag performance in city council chambers, he got up and clapped and kind of danced with them a little bit. He didn't put a stop to it. He looked like he was enjoying it, which is kind of odd for somebody who's supposed to be at least identifying with the party of conservatism. So even he's kind of liberal. And so when you look at the city council in Lexington and you look at the mayor's race and you say, well, we maybe have two Republicans in our city government in Lexington with nonpartisan elections, and they're not that conservative even of Republicans, you'd say, well, is this whole nonpartisan thing working? Because the problem is that there are areas of Lexington that are conservative. I mean, there are partisan House seats that are areas that are conservative enough that a Republican can take and win those areas. Even in Lexington, parts of Lexington, you look at senator districts that have large chunks of Lexington that can still win, sure. They have some people outside of the Lexington area, some other conservatives out in rural areas that they're picking up to help offset the liberalness in Lexington. But at the same time, when you look at their numbers within Lexington, they don't perform too badly. So we have partisans winning elections. And when you look at Louisville, their county clerk it's a partisan election, and she's a Republican. I don't know how she keeps winning. She does run the elections, but I don't know how she keeps winning. I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying that a Republican does win countywide in Louisville. I believe that's Bobby Holtzclaw is her name. But anyway, so they're making this move to make Louisville elections now nonpartisan, even though there hasn't been such great results necessarily in Lexington. Now, of course, the belief is that perhaps if there wasn't a party affiliation tied to it and it was a nonpartisan election, you could see a Republican winning the mayor's race, which makes you wonder if there's anybody within the legislature maybe eyeing at running for mayor of Louisville. I've heard some whispers and chitter chatter that maybe Jason Nemes was looking at it, but I don't know how accurate that is. He's now in leadership in the House, so you'd think he'd maybe want to stay there. But I've heard chitter chatter along those lines. But also what's interesting here is, according to my sources, the chair of the Jefferson County Republican Party, so the Republican Party there in Louisville, and the Republican Party in Jefferson County actually doesn't like this either. Because actually, when you look at percentages of elected Republicans within the city government, Louisville actually has more Republicans elected to the city council than Republicans elected in Lexington's nonpartisan city council by percentages. And I'm told that the chair there in Jefferson County says, hey, we're winning. We feel like we're winning here. We're starting to pick up some pace. We're starting to do well. And now you're kind of pulling out the feet from underneath of us. And one of the reasons why, and a belief some people have over why these nonpartisan elections do go liberal, and we see this with boards of elections and so on and so forth, is because for a long time, the Republican parties, especially local Republican parties, have stayed out of, here in Kentucky, for some reason, they've stayed out of the nonpartisan elections. They would only openly support, work, and advocate for individuals that were partisan, and they left these nonpartisan races just kind of to the side. And as Democrats started losing more and more in the House and more in the Senate, the local Democrat Party said, look, we're not necessarily going to be able to turn that tide right away, but what we can do is put more of our efforts into winning these local elections, because the most powerful, highest elected Democrats, other than, of course, Beshear, is going to be in Louisville and Lexington. And so they put their efforts into getting them elected. And meanwhile, the Republican Party here in Kentucky has drawn away from those elections. And so that could be a reason why we see Democrats winning those. And so this nonpartisan, I'd love to know who thought it up, who thought it was a good idea, and see how that kind of worked out as far as thought process goes. Because it doesn't look like they really touch base with and talk to any individuals, within the party area, within, obviously the city of Louisville, Jefferson County Republicans. I haven't talked to them because they'd find out they didn't really want it. But maybe, like I said, maybe there's some of the Republican representatives up there from those areas believe that there's a chance that if it was nonpartisan, the Republicans would win more. I don't know. We have seen some snippets of the budget so far that I can see that hasn't, because, obviously I'm recording this ahead of time because of, I have to, obviously this isn't live. And so looking at those snippets of the budget that I do have access to seeing, just looking at some of the boondoggle spending within it, a lot of local handouts. It looks like, according to Austin Horn, reporter from the Herald Leader, that there is 18 carve-outs for Louisville in the document, special kind of handouts. But here's just a little bit of it here. We've got $2 million to Greene County Fiscal Court for various projects, $301,000 to Warren County for the beautification of I-65 corridor. We have $1.5 million going to the Save Our Appalachian region for remote talent attraction. $1.5 million for remote talent attraction to attract in people who work remotely. $3.5 million to the city of Paducah to complete a federally funded build grant project. $1.25 million for the Covington Life Science Center for equipment and facilities. $500,000 for the city of Covington for Covington Partners for Violence Prevention Efforts. $1.25 million to the Jefferson Memorial Forest. By the way, did you know the Jefferson Memorial Forest is the largest urban forest preserve in the U.S.? There you go, right there in Louisville. Anyways, $3.75 million to the General James Taylor Park. $3.75 million to the General James Taylor Park. That seems like a lot. We'll go into that. $11.25 to fund half the project for a Frankfurt Convention Center building. So $1.5 million in each $1.5 million total, $750,000 each year for the Grand Lyric Theater in Louisville. We'll be going over each kind of one of those items, kind of digging into a little bit about some of the more interesting ones, some conversation on that. So are they necessary? Are they not? I mean, you could argue none of these should be necessary too if we changed around some of our operating systems and this kind of redistribution of wealth we have here in Kentucky. So I'll be going over that after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Now, one thing that has floated around before I go into some of the spending bill stuff that I was just talking about, one rumor that's kind of floated around up in Frankfurt is moving the 59th legislative day back to this upcoming Monday. So remember where I was talking about there's a veto period, a chance to overcome the bills that Beshear vetoes. And normally it's 2 days. And it's normally 2 days because a part of, the ability to pass bills, you have to have concurrence votes and things like that. So there's normally some pieces of legislation that they do not believe Beshear would veto or he can't veto. For an example, constitutional amendments. It requires 60% in the House, 60% in the Senate to vote yes to pass, but it is unavailable for the governor to veto. The governor can't veto those pieces of legislation. And then also, legislation, like I said, that the governor doesn't have an issue with. And, they'll move those pieces of legislation on those final 2 days. Now, there could be a possibility that they don't really have too many things that they're worried about the governor not vetoing that they want to get done, or they have a clear plan in place already, or there's no real last minute bills beyond what they're doing now. And so rumor, and apparently, according to Austin Horn here, Damon Thayer didn't deny the possibility that they go ahead and move the 59th legislative day back to before the veto period, so that way they can pass more legislation before the governor's veto. Something that could be uniquely possible as we look at bills like Senate Bill 6 and what's kind of happened on that piece of legislation, which we'll have to probably cover Monday, what occurred there. But anyways, so that is a possibility. They could move it around. Now, before the break, I was talking about some pieces of spending. Very interesting list I kind of went through just from what can be seen as of me recording this, as they don't have all of it available. We'll do a deeper dive into it, obviously, in the coming weeks as we look at just exactly how our legislators decide to spend our money. But there was a few things that I pointed out, a few different spending, and, this is all very earmarked specific things. For an example, like the $1.5 million to save our Appalachian region for remote talent attraction. What's the purpose of that? What's the reason of that? So what goes on right now in our state is there a whole lot of wealth redistribution going on. So money gets pulled in from the richer counties in the forms of, whether that's sales tax, corporate income tax, property taxes of various sorts, so on and so forth. By the way, those of you who, and I just did it there, who haven't been listening to the show for the last week, I've had a nasty cough for like a week now. So sorry if you hear me hacking a little bit there. throughout the day, but I am managing it pretty well. I need to take probably a few days of just a break to rest my voice a little bit. I'll probably have that here over the next few days. But anyway, so they hand out these individual earmarked area projects, and the idea is for them to be able to bring in more money into that area. Because while the state has, sales tax, insurance tax, property taxes, income taxes from the corporations as an option, they have a few different taxing tools at their disposal. The local governments don't have those possibilities there. They're instead stuck with a little more limitations. And it makes it harder for them to earn money off the people actually living in the area. So for an example, if you're in Eastern Kentucky and you have a whole lot of people who are either on Social Security, on disability, on retirement, on those types of things, they're not working. Well, they can't collect up a sales tax, so they can't make money off them just living in the area. And a property tax becomes hard because the value of the property isn't super high because obviously it's not near as much. And so you end up in a predicament. And the predicament is, how do these governments make their ends meet? I mean, I was talking to a judge executive of one county out in Eastern Kentucky who said, look, without major changes, we're bankrupt in the next 5 years. The coal severance fund's getting lower and lower and lower because obviously not as many people are buying coal. And we're just trying to make ends meet, and I don't know how we're going to do it. So you see projects like the $1.5 million for the Save Our Appalachian region to attract in remote talent. So when they talk about investing in a local area, what they're talking about doing is taking this money and hoping to attract in employers, because the biggest source, what should be the biggest source of a lot of these counties' budgets, is what's called the occupational tax, or like an income tax. But in order to earn an income tax, you earn it off people that work in the county, not people that live in the county. And so if you want to pull in more income tax, your best bet is to have people that work in the county. And so obviously one of the ways to do that would be this remote talent attraction. So that's part of the reason why they dump in this $1.5 million, but that's why they spend money in a lot of these different places, mostly. But sometimes it's just an earmark to get funds back into the area. Take for an example, when I read the $3.75 million in each fiscal year for the Campbell County Fiscal Court for General James Taylor Park. $3.75 million. So that's a total of $7.5 million. Now you may say, well, who knows what they're building? To put that in perspective, though, for you, according to my best estimates, because I couldn't find it online with a quick search, but I did measure from a satellite view using an aerial land measurement tool. General James Taylor Park is right on the river there in northern Kentucky, right where, Covington, Newport is, that area. And it's only like 5 acres. And so $7.5 million over 2 years is $1.5 million an acre. $1.5 million an acre is what they're spending. I don't know what Campbell County plans to do with that area at $1.5 million an acre for $7.5 million. I mean, you could literally build a house that covers most of that area for that amount of money. I mean, I have no clue what they're putting in there. I didn't look it up. I just know that sounds like a lot of money. And it sounds like a lot of money going back to a group that, yeah, I get it. Northern Kentucky is a big place to pull in a lot of money. They deserve to get some money back, I guess. But at the same time, they're not having trouble attracting in tourists. They're not having trouble attracting in employers. But yet we're going to dump this money in here. And so it makes you wonder, where's the investment there? What's the thought process here? Who's steering the ship? And obviously that's a trade-off for some votes from somebody, or to make somebody look good or give somebody a ribbon cutting opportunity. But, it's things like that make you want to pull your hair out. You're like, whoa, that's a lot of money to dump into one park, $1.5 million an acre. Now, you'd say if we're trying to do this, if we really want to put an end to this type of process, what we need to be doing is looking at policies and procedures to affect change in how our counties are pulling in revenues. But that would involve giving up an income tax, and they don't want to do that. They'll try to sell you on something called a local option sales tax, but they don't want to get rid of the income tax in order to do it. I sat down with the people that push local option sales tax that helps solve this issue, but they refuse to put forward an amendment, because it has to be a constitutional amendment, that allows local option sales tax, but removes income tax, and that's the only way they'll get support. But there's something else that they've earmarked in this budget I want to talk about, but we'll have that after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. There was one more part of the spending I did want to point out. It's pretty ridiculous, and it deals with the half funding of the Frankfort Convention Center. It's $11.25 million funding half of the $22.5 million Frankfort Convention Center project. And part of the reason why I have such a big problem with this, and just something to point out, is our legislature is planning on, it would seem, to build another building on top of the parking garage as a temporary House and Senate chamber, I guess, for them. Because you see, they're doing construction to our Capitol over the next few years, and they have to, for a few years, meet somewhere else. And so they're trying to construct a temporary Capitol building that will probably cost much more than $22.5 million. And my problem with it, and one thing to point out, is this is where government becomes a never-ending black pit of never-ending spending. It doesn't matter how much money you give them. It doesn't matter how much money you shove in there. It will never be enough. They will figure out how to spend it. Because if they didn't have the money to build that temporary structure, they wouldn't build it, and they'd figure it out. And one of the things they could figure out is saying, look, Convention Center, we'll go ahead and pay this $11.25 million for half, but during these times, during the next X years, this convention center is to be finished by, and we are to be allowed to have our chambers there for our meeting for our legislature. In return, we give you this money to finish the project. So we're already kind of thinking about funding the project, but now we're going to save tens of millions of dollars by not having to build a temporary chamber. And then also, we now get this use for free for this time, for a few years here, in return for us funding this. And because it's easy, the House chamber can meet there. That's 100 plus staff plus everything else. So let's say 150 people. Let's say it's even 300 you need to fit. Should be able to fit that fine in a convention center that's going to cost $22.5 million. I sure hope you can fit a couple hundred people in a room. And then the Senate could, with a little bit of retrofitting, go over to the old Capitol building. Yeah, it's old, but they go there once a year anyways to hold chamber. Have it there for a year, retrofit it, put some AC units in if you have to try to cool it down, whatever you got to do. Have the Senate there, have the House there. Just do it that way until it's finished completing and save the taxpayer tens of millions of dollars. That's something they don't want to do. So that was another thing on the spending bill I wanted to point out. Now, another interesting bill passed late in the day yesterday, and it deals with Senate Bill 2, which was an interesting bill to begin with. It dealt with something called school guardians, and it was allowing basically, people who have recently been honorably discharged out of the military within the past 5 years, or retired Kentucky State Police or law enforcement to either volunteer or be paid to be kind of a fill-in SRO. So, these school resource officers, basically police officers, some of these schools have been struggling to fill in that role. And so this offers them the ability to go outside the normal structure. Now, it doesn't say they have to stop trying to find an SRO, but it does say that they could go ahead and hire these guardians in, or guardians can volunteer to help with school security until they can find an SRO. And what's real funny is when this bill was originally proposed, Neiman Brewer, one of the 120 wrong, 120 strong, 120 AFTE union, whatever you want to call them, people, this teachers union, spoke out against it, saying, oh, you're just going to get nothing but far-right extremists and Proud Boys. They want protecting our schools, which is really odd because it was veterans and retired police officers. Like literally, the retired police officers, literally the people you would have just hired to do this anyways, but are just, 1 or 2 years, however many years retired from doing it, or ex-military. And so what are you saying? You saying all of them are far-right extremists? Like, how do you sleep at night thinking our entire military and all of our police officers are far-right extremists? But that was what one of the heads of the teachers unions here in Kentucky tweeted out. But anyways, they added something interesting onto it for this part of the bill that deals with trauma response team. So if a student has any kind of trauma that the school responds to, this trauma response team comes to them to offer resources and help them deal through with their mental issues. That already is a little iffy, in my opinion, for schools to be wading into. I already think schools should spend less time worrying about students' feelings and more time teaching them how to read, write, and do math, but, just my opinion. But they added the ability for a pastoral counselor to be a part of the team. I don't like this bill. I'm going to be honest. I haven't, it just passed. Keep this in mind. But my digging into it, I don't like it. And here's why. So a pastoral counselor, according to the bill, has the same meaning as the Kentucky licensed pastoral counselor. And a Kentucky licensed pastoral counselor, as defined in KRS 335.605, is somebody who's been certified by, they're called the American Association of Pastoral Counselors, and basically it to be certified by them. According to their website, there's nothing in here to, it's not only Christian, which, the minute you start bringing in pastoral counselor to the schools, it would have to be something where, you would want the parents of the student to tell them, who or what religion the pastoral counselor is, because it gets real funny. So you don't have to be Christian to be a pastoral counselor. You can be literally any faith at all. Interfaith, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, Christian, Buddhist, American Indian, and Alaska Native. Those are all categories they offer in this certification. And so with that being offered within the certification, there's no guarantee that the pastoral counselor you're going to get unless you have the choice to pick it. And like I said, I looked through the bill real quick. I didn't see, it's a big bill, but I didn't see anywhere where you get to pick what faith your pastoral counselor's from. And so in a perfect world, you'd think, well, you'll end up with a good Christian pastoral counselor if your kid's a Christian, or maybe your kid's Muslim. You say, hey, he'll end up with a good Muslim, or if they're Jewish, a good Jewish counselor. That's allowed in the law. But the problem is for an example, take Christian. Anybody who goes and pays attention to the Christian religion right now, anybody who goes to church, knows there's a whole lot of touchy-feely Christian beliefs out there right now that are not biblical and are not based soundly. And I don't want just anybody. It could almost be worse. So, I try to raise my son, we go to church and, Christian values. I don't want just anybody talking to him about his faith. Because just because you say you're a pastor doesn't mean you actually are if you're Annie Bashir's pastor, I definitely don't want you talking to my kid. Because Annie Bashir thinks that somehow the Christian thing to do is to allow parents to disfigure and chop off the body parts of kids. The Christian thing to do is to encourage or keep from parents When a child's quote unquote transitioning at school secretly, keep that from the parents because, they might be mean about it. According to whatever belief system he has, that's the case. He believes the parable of the Good Samaritan means use government force to take money from everybody and then spend it on whatever you think it should be spent on. That's what he believes, according to his public statements that he's made about his faith. I don't want him or his pastor anywhere talking to my kid about Christianity because their Christianity isn't biblical. Their Christianity isn't backed up by scripture. Their Christianity doesn't fit our belief system. They may call themselves Christians, but I disagree. I'm also not Catholic. I don't want a Catholic priest talk. So who do you think, like honestly, if your school's putting together a trauma response team, these schools, like I just posted online pictures from Lexington, Fayette County schools, one cafeteria that had rainbow flags, trans flags, and BLM signs everywhere in one middle school cafeteria. Who do you think they're going to hire to comfort your child and call them a pastoral care member? So I'm not a super big fan of this bill. On the surface, I don't like it. I'm going to dig into it more before Monday's show, but I don't particularly like this bill. Well, y'all, that's what we have time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Thank you all for joining me. We'll see you back here Monday. Have a great rest of your weekend.